This is the Living Vertizontal podcast, brought to you by The Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. We are a podcast that discusses the intersection of Scripture and our lives. Together, we continue the conversation that was started each preceding Sunday morning in our worship gathering.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are the Living Vertizontal podcast, back with you this week to continue our journey through the Gospel of Luke together. As a quick reminder, last week we were working through Luke chapter 17, verses 20 through 37, where Jesus was questioned by some Pharisees about the coming of the kingdom of God. And then he also went on to kind of talk about that with his disciples as well. From this passage, we discussed the existence of the kingdom here and now and the kingdom yet to come. While we wait in the gap of what is yet to come, Jesus has invited us to be prepared through active participation in his kingdom here and now. The most important question we can be asking of Jesus on a moment-by-moment basis following on from this is how? How would you like me to participate in your right here, right now kingdom? This week, we're going to continue on in the conversation in a way as we move into Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, where Jesus tells a parable of the persistent widow. I'm going to go ahead and read that for us, and then we'll jump into our conversation and see how this kind of follows on from the previous one. So, here we go. Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray at all times and not lose heart. In a certain town, there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected men. And there was a widow in that town who kept appealing to him, "Give me justice against my adversary." For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, "Though I neither fear God nor respect men, yet because this widow keeps pestering me, I will give her justice. Then she will stop wearing me out with her perpetual requests." And the Lord said, "Listen to the words of the unjust judge. Will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry out to him day and night? Will he continue to defer their help? I tell you, he will promptly carry out justice on their behalf. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" So that's our passage. Lots of questions there at the end. But as we move into it, where should we start?
Well, I think probably starting with a purpose would be a good spot to start. And conveniently, in this particular passage, Jesus gives that right to us.
Very
so he
convenient.
makes it easy.
Yeah.
So in verse 1, he said, in verse 1, it says, "Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray at all times and not lose heart." And so the purpose here is to pray at all times and not lose heart. And this seems appropriate given the context that we've just been talking about,
Sure.
right? You just mentioned how Jesus has been preparing them, right? He's preparing them for troubles that are to come ahead. Jesus knows the cross is coming. They don't know the cross yet. They don't understand the cross yet. We have the vantage point of looking at this and understanding this through the lens of the cross. So we have a little bit of an unfair advantage, I'd say, or maybe a divine advantage. And so Jesus knew this, right? He knew the cross was coming. And so it's important then that he takes the time to teach them how to behave in the midst of all of the persecution that's going to follow, in the fall of Jerusalem that's going to follow. And so, this preparation that he's doing is really to ensure that when things get hard, are they going to continue to maintain faith? Are they going to continue to believe? Are they going to continue to hope and expect that he's going to accomplish what he initially set out to do?
Right. So this is kind of a a continuation, really. It's not, I know it's a new chapter
Yes.
in the Gospel of Luke. However, it's very important that we continue to hold this together. As has often been the case, I feel like the breaks, unfortunately, they help us reference things. They give us points where we can be like, okay, this is the chunk we're going to be looking at.
They can really mess us up,
but they can definitely mess us up, and we unnecessarily dissociate things and kind of lose the fullness of the meaning. And so it's very important, like you said, that we hold this together with what Jesus has talked about. And I mean, the questions of, where will this happen or when will this happen? Talking about like the day of the Lord, the fullness of the kingdom of God arriving, Jesus kind of adjusts that and says, that's not really the question you need to be asking. Don't worry about that. You just need to be ready, right? That was kind of the thrust of the conversation last week. And in the midst of this conversation of being ready, it's like, well, then how are we, what does it look like for us to be ready? At least that's the question that I would come. They didn't ask that. But that's kind of where I'm left.
Jesus is anticipating it.
And
clearly.
it does. It very much seems like Jesus is anticipating that. And so he's like, okay, in this waiting period, while you're waiting for this to happen, since it's not the right question to ask when or where, this is how you're going to sit. This is how you're going to be in that in-between time. I can't remember. I think that's how we referred to it last week, was the in-between time, or the time of waiting. And so how are we going to participate? How are we supposed to behave in this time of waiting between I guess essentially the moment when Jesus leaves them, right? Mm-hmm. And then the moment that he returns, which in last week's passage, that was referenced as the day of the Son of Man. So kind of a Daniel 7 reference of that final day of judgment when everything is set right. How do we behave between those 2 points?
Right.
And as we move into this passage today, we have that answer. This is how you behave. This is how you participate.
Right. To pray and to not lose heart. And so I think it's worth maybe discussing a little bit. So if we know that we're in this season of waiting, and we're to pray and not lose heart, it might be appropriate for us to take a moment and just kind of consider why it is that we stop praying.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a tough question, because it requires us to be honest and really vulnerable, probably, in a way. Because when I think about it, and I think about the things that I've been praying for and the things that I'm still praying for, or that I know I should be praying for, I should say. I think a lot of the times the struggle starts to come in when I begin to, for me, maybe doubt a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like maybe God's not hearing me. Maybe he's doesn't really care about what I'm saying, what I'm praying about, what I'm talking to him about. And so I guess in a way it's like discouragement. Like I'm beginning to get discouraged in the midst of my waiting.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is really loaded and probably situationally specific. I could imagine being distracted could oftentimes, right? We just get busy with things and we forget that we're really praying on behalf of a person or advocating for someone. And so we're really looking to have Jesus accomplish something. We really want that, but we just become so busy looking at all the other things that we're distracted and lose sight of what we're supposed to be focusing on. But discouragement is, I think, a huge one as well. And I think, unfortunately, oftentimes it brings us to this place where we kind of quietly conclude that nothing's really going to change anyway. And so then, do my prayers really matter?
Mm-hmm. What's the point?
Are my prayers heard? Do they matter? And so I think that Jesus anticipated the temptation to fall into these traps, both for the disciples then following him, which is why he gives them these instructions, but then also continuing on for us today. And I think that's why Luke thought it so important to include this in his account of, his detailed account of everything that had been taught.
Yeah. I mean, cause this parable, in a way, circling back to where this conversation began, is different than the other parables to this point, especially because like you said, Luke actually provides the lens for us to understand this parable. Like we don't have to sit back wondering, what is it exactly that Jesus is trying to say here? It's like Luke is not wanting anything to be like left to chance in interpreting this. He wants to make it very clear. This is what it's about. And this is why it's important. This is why it matters to you.
Absolutely. And so I think with all of this conversation about distraction, discouragement, losing hope, losing faith, it's important for us to be reminded of the character of God, like who God is. In this parable, we get a picture of a judge.
Not God.
Not God.
Right.
God is judge, not this judge, right?
Yeah.
In this passage, right, in verse 2, it says, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected men. This is exactly the opposite of what we would expect God to be like, right? And judges would have been probably Roman appointed. And so they would have been a paid official who was very, very powerful and really beyond probably public influence.
Yeah. Beyond reproach, like they're at least from the community that they're operating in.
Yes. Yeah. And so I guess in that way, maybe we look a little bit like God, right? Has all authority.
Sure.
But everything else about it is wrong.
Doesn't
right?
track.
It is so wrong because God respects man so much, right? He respects humanity so much. And so I think it's really important. I stressed over and over to the kids today. We even repeated it. This judge is not God. This judge is not God. And so we got to be really careful not to read this passage in that way.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that would be kind of the default, right? Would be to say, oh yeah, the judge is God. I mean, at least I would venture to say it's been my default. And it's been actually kind of the hang up point that I've had with this parable, like trying to make the connection. Yeah. It's like, man, Jesus is being kind of weird about who God is. Like, this is a messed up picture of the character of God. It seems very inconsistent with the character of God. But like you said, it's very important for us to identify and stress the reality that when Jesus is telling this parable, the judge that he is bringing up in no way, shape, or form is he saying the judge is God or even like God. In fact, a little bit later in the parable, or in the conversation at the end of the parable, the conclusion of it with verse 7, Jesus makes a statement, will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry out to him day and night? In other words, listen to the words of the unjust judge. If even he is doing it, how much more is God going to do something like this? And that's a pretty common rabbinic technique.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that before on the podcast as well. Yeah, we see this over and over.
So like it's the how much more, I forgot what the term is in Hebrew, but
we'll forgive you.
Thank you. It's the how much more argument, right? So from arguing from a lesser to a greater. And so the lesser in this is the judge who neither fears God nor respects humanity. And the greater is obviously actually God, who does respect himself and humanity.
Right. I mean, when you compare the judge with God and you compare his unjustness, his selfishness, all of these things that God is exactly the opposite of, right? We know God is good. We know he is loving. We know he is selfless. He is servant. We know all these things about him. And so when you contrast the unjust judge to God, of course, if an unjust judge is going to see this widow and answer her cry, why would God, who is good and loves us and wants what's best for us, why would he not answer the persistent prayer? And that's really the argument that's being made here in this passage.
Sure. So I think something that might be good for us to do then, so we've identified and kind of talked about who this judge is.
Right.
And his position, his influence, his power. Maybe it would be also good for us to kind of bring up who the widow is, not necessarily like personally who the widow is, but how the widow fits. What is her story? What is her lot in life?
Yeah. Okay. So we don't get a whole lot about the widow here, but based on her circumstances, we know that she is coming to advocate on her behalf, which is not typical. if possible, she would have had a male advocate go. So
Right.
her husband would have gone to advocate. Her father would have gone to advocate.
A son. Yeah.
There should have been some male
kind
advocate.
of kinsman redeemer or something.
Something.
Yeah.
And because that's absent from here, it leads us to believe that this widow is truly on her own. She
Yes.
has no other representation other than herself. And so that just kind of paints this picture of a person who is extremely desperate, right? She is in a place where there has been some injustice done to her. And we could sit and speculate about the injustice. Obviously, this is a parable story, so there's not a true injustice that's been.
And I think that's
occurred
intentional,
to her.
right? To allow
Right.
it to apply to a wide range of things.
Yeah, so we don't get stuck and focused on that. But we can anticipate that whatever it is that has happened to her must have changed her life dramatically enough that she is now in this position of absolute desperation.
Yep.
There is no other option. There
Right.
is no other hope. There is nobody else.
Right.
And so she comes repeatedly to this judge. He is her last hope, her only hope.
Yeah. She is dependent on him. Like if she wants things set right, if she wants things fixed, then the only way that is going to be accomplished is through this judge.
Right.
Making it right. Through this judge listening and responding to her calls and her cries.
Yeah. And I think if there's going to be a parallel in this story, I think the widow is where we should be seeing the parallel.
Yeah.
When we look at the widow, or when the disciples heard this parable and looked at the widow, they hopefully should have seen themselves.
Yeah.
They should have said, we are desperate.
Yep.
We can't do this
Yep.
without God. We need our good judge. Right? We need God, the Father, to help us through these things. And in order for us to remain in that state, recognizing that we need him, we need to continue to pray at all times and not lose heart, right? We need to have such great faith that we believe that he's going to accomplish incredible things. And so this is the message Jesus really wants to give to his disciples. And I think by extension, us, right?
Yeah.
When things are hard, when things are difficult, when things are messy, remain dependent. I want you to be dependent on me, and I want to help you. I am good. I love you. I have your best. Trust me and believe.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. And I agree with it. And I think that then brings us though to the place where the question becomes, okay, so what do we do with the moments or the reality that sometimes either we are still waiting for a prayer to be answered, or we don't ever see a prayer get answered. I mean, I can think of many different stories throughout the Old and New Testament, right, where people were praying for something or were expecting something and they never got to see it come to fruition. What does that say? Like, what do we do with that?
Well, I think it goes back to this dependence piece that we were just talking about with the widow. Delay teaches dependence. And not to say that God delays always for that purpose, but delay teaches perseverance. It teaches humility, right? It can teach us hope, or it can help us to commune at a deeper level with God. There's so many good things that can come out of God's delay in answering prayers, in establishing justice on our behalf, that I think that there's enough there for us to say, okay, God, in the midst of this, as I wait, as I persistently come to you and ask, what are you hoping to accomplish in me in this season? And I think that's really probably the best place for us to sit, recognizing that Jesus is telling this parable to a group of disciples who are going to, most of them, be martyred.
Yep.
And I doubt that that was their idea of God giving them earthly justice.
Yeah.
And so they had to trust him, to depend on him, that there was a greater purpose at hand, that something bigger was happening despite the difficult, tragic, horrific circumstances that they were enduring, and to believe. And so by extension, I think that when we go through challenging and difficult seasons, it's important for us to, regardless of outcome, remain in this persistent state of prayer, of requesting, of asking, of believing, because God desires us to have that level of dependence on him.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is very much so modeled through the life of Jesus when you look at the Gospels as well.
Absolutely.
Especially like I can think of in his time in the wilderness when he's being tempted and tested and he's got all these pressures to give in, and yet he continues to depend on his Father, right? He depends on his Father, And in the Gospel of John, I know it's not the Gospel of Luke, but in the Gospel of John, it talks about how he's led by the Spirit, he's empowered by the Spirit, and he is filled with the Spirit during this time because of his dependence. And I can't help but think and believe that there is a parallel there. As we wander through our wilderness times, I mean, maybe this time of waiting, maybe this time in between, right? In between the ascension of Christ and the day of the Son of Man, maybe this is kind of like our wilderness time where we are invited to grow in our dependence on him. And as we grow in our dependence on him, we find ourselves kind of emptied of ourselves. And as we are emptied of ourselves, we can be filled with his Spirit. And as we are filled with his Spirit, he can lead us by his Spirit. And as he leads us by his Spirit, we are empowered. And even though we may not ever actually see the fullness of what we hope to see, what we believe we will see, it doesn't mean that it's all for naught. It doesn't mean that this has just been a time that's wasted, that's empty, right? Jesus in the garden, before he goes to the cross, he desperately does not want to go to the cross. I think that's pretty clear in his prayer. And yet he submits and says, and yet not my will, but your will, because he's dependent on his Father. He recognizes this isn't my show. I'm pursuing you with everything that I am, Father. And so as I pursue you, if this is the direction you say we're going to go, this is the direction we're going to go. And I mean, in a way, it's almost like Jesus doesn't even get to see the fullness of his kingdom. And yet he still lives in that vein and that life of dependence on his Father. And so he sets this great example for each and every single one of us, as do his disciples, right? He sets this example for his disciples, and then his disciples live into that. I think of Stephen. Like, he wasn't one of the 12, but he was one from the 12, and he never got to see the fullness of the glory of God coming in to take over and like restore Israel to greatness. He didn't see any of this. He was martyred like a lot of the other disciples, and yet he still believed, he still depended, he still trusted enough in his Father that was worth it.
Yeah, I mean, and so I think that it's really important for us to remember that waiting or this feeling of silence isn't the absence of God's activity in our life. Waiting is really a means by which God will use to disciple us, that he's regularly interacting with us, shaping us, transforming us during that waiting season. And so the last thing he wants is for us to give up, to stop coming to him, to stop being transformed because we lose hope, we lose faith, we lose belief. And so I just think that this message, this gift from Jesus, right, was so important probably in the lives of the disciples, and really should be for us today as we go through trials and difficult seasons.
Yeah, this encouragement, be like the widow. This widow, knowing what she knows about the judge, right? A judge that neither fears God, which means there's no divine authority in his life that's going to make him do the right thing or going to kind of encourage him to do the right thing. He doesn't respect mankind, so there's no human authority that's going to force him to do what he ought to do. even though as a judge, like according to like when you look
Jewish
through scripture,
law,
Jewish law,
got...
the judge should be, number one, a like obedient to God and also respect humanity. Like they should be looking out, especially for the widows. Like the widows were even mentioned by name,
right,
to be protected and cared for. And so he's shirking all of those responsibilities. And yet even knowing that he is shirking all of those responsibilities, this widow is persistent. She doesn't give up.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like she, even knowing that more than likely she will not receive justice, she knows that if she's going to receive justice, the only way that happens is by coming to him. So I'm going to just keep coming. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if everybody else thinks I'm crazy because there's no way he's going to see me and take care of it. I'm going to keep coming because I am dependent on him for this answer. In the same way, like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because this is all about our dependence on our Father. Recognizing that there's not much that I can do on my own abilities and my own right to right everything around me. It's just not going to happen. And so I come to my Father in expectation, in dependence, in full trust, believing that if there is anybody who can make this right, he's the one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't give up. I keep coming in persistence. I keep coming in persistence, and I keep coming in belief. And I think that is a super important key when we look at where Jesus leaves them at the end of this parable. In verse 8, where he leaves off and leaves us off is with a list of questions, but perhaps the last question being one of the most important questions, where he says, "Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" And again, I think this is like Jesus kind of giving a gut check to his disciples. Like, you guys are asking when, they're asking where. That's the wrong question. What I need to ask you is, when I do come back, when the Son of Man does return, will you still have faith? Even though you're not seeing things that you think you should be seeing, even though you're not experiencing things that you think you should be experiencing, are you still going to believe? Are you still going to trust? Do you still have faith in me? Do you still have faith in my Father, that he is good, that we are trustworthy, that we are dependable? Do you? When we come back, are we going to find that? Or in our absence, or in my absence, that
Jesus speaking.
Jesus speaking, in my absence, that from like what you've gotten used to experiencing, are you just going to fall away?
You know, I wrote this question down in my time when I was going through the passage this week, and I think it might be maybe a question that Jesus would want everybody to kind of carefully reflect on. So perhaps we could close with this final question. Sure. So I wrote, what prayer have you quietly stopped praying? Not because God said no, but because you got tired, disappointed, distracted, discouraged, because you quietly concluded that nothing's changing. What prayer have you quietly stopped praying? As you journey with us through the Gospel of Luke, we recommend purchasing Midweek Meditations, A Journey Through Luke Part 6, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizontal podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.